So now that we have a token, let's go ahead and add authentication to our application so that we check this token before we allow the user to access resources. And what we'll do in our startup.cs class is we'll need to add authentication as an additional service. So we'll say services and add authentication. And we need to specify in here the default scheme that we're using. So we're using JWT bearer as our scheme. So we'll say JWT bearer defaults. And we'll need to bring in ASP.NET Core authentication JWT bearer. And then specify authentication scheme. And then we need to add JWT bearer. And we need to give this some options. So we'll pass in opt, and then inside this expression we'll say opt.token validation parameters equals new token validation parameters. And we'll also need to bring in Microsoft Identity Model tokens. And what we want to do is tell our API what we should be validating when we receive a token. So we want to validate the issuer signing key so that we don't accept any tokens without first of all validating that that signing key is a valid key. And we also need to give it the issuer signing key, and we need to specify our key here. Now we don't have access to our key at the moment, so we'll need to create this. So just above our services, I'm going to say var key equals new and symmetric security key, and we'll just do the same thing again. We need to provide this with a byte array of our string, our token key. So we'll say encoding, and we'll need to bring in system.text and UTF-8 and get bytes, just the same thing we did before. And once again, I'll just hard code our key in here for the time being. And we'll say super secret key. And we also need to just override a couple of the defaults as well, just so we can see this is working. And we need to say validate audience equals false. And what we could use for our audience is the URL it's coming from. But we're not doing that at the moment, so we're just going to turn off the validation for the audience. And we'll also validate the issuer and say this is false as well. So we're not going to mess around with the local host URLs that we're currently issuing our token from or receiving our token from. And we're just keeping things as simple as we can to prove that this is working. So with this in place, this add authentication available in our services, what we can do then is come down to our middleware, and inside our configure method, what we can do is say app and use authentication. So authentication is available now to use, but we haven't actually added any authentication in our application. And what we can do to ensure that our API endpoints are protected is use an authorize attribute. So I'm just going to go into the activities controller to demonstrate this. And what we'll do is we'll just pick on one method inside here, the activity details method, and we'll specify the authorize attributes in here, and we'll also need to bring in ASP.NET Core authorization. And now any requests that come into our details endpoint will have to be authorized, otherwise we're going to get a 401 not authorized. So let's head back to Postman and take a look at making some GET requests for our application. Now the first request we'll make is to our activities list, and we didn't add authorization to this, so this should just work as it always has. And I'll click on send and we get our list of activities. So far so good. Now we'll need to copy one of our IDs into our clipboard so that in our next request, the get activity without any auth I'll just overwrite the GUID for the ID of the activity, and I'll click send. And this time we get 401 unauthorized, which means our activity details method is being protected by authorization. And what we can do in order to authorize this request, I'm just going to click on the next one, the get activity with auth. The difference between this one and the other one is in our headers, we're specifying an authorization and we're passing in a token as a bearer token, so we say bearer, and then we paste in our token. But we'll need to go and get our token, so I'm just going to go back to the login user successful and copy this token into my clipboard. And we'll go back to the get activity, and we just need to overwrite this particular token with the token in our clipboard. And this is going to send up our token with our request, and what we should find now is that when we click on send, and I also need to make sure this is using the GUID for the activity, so I'm just going to copy this into my clipboard as well and paste it into the get activity. So we're getting an individual activity, but this time we're sending up our bearer token with the request, and if I click on send, this time we get the activity back. So we've now got the ability to protect our API endpoints with authorization. Now we won't use authorize attribute on every single method. What we'll do is we'll add an authorize policy very soon so that every request is protected with authorization, and then we can just change it for the ones that we don't need authorization on, because most of our endpoints are going to be protected. But what I want to take a look at next is to deal with this issue of using the hard-coded key inside our code. And what we'll take a look at next is using .NET user secrets to store things like our token key here. And we'll take a look at that next.